In this video, we're going to show you how to install a VVT solenoid on your Ford Explorer located in the front side of your engine. With the hood open, we want to go ahead and release the little two retainer buttons here. There's one here on the back side, one over on the top of the throttle body on the driver's side there. When you use our trim tool, you get right in the middle of it. You lift up on that center button there. And when that pulls up, then the bottom half will pull out. I'm going to go ahead and do the same on the driver's side. With both of those out, I'm going to go ahead and remove the cover here. You're going to pull it up over the oil fill tube on the front. Wiggle that up and off and set that aside. I want to go ahead and separate the intake portion from the upper intake plenum. There's a vacuum hose right here. We're going to just pull up on this, separate that. Loosen the hose clamp from the air intake tube to the throttle body. Now if you come on down over here, there's a vacuum tube here going to the intake. There's a little gray clip on it. You're going to push that back and then pull this off, just like so. On the other end of the air intake tube, we're going to locate our other screw clamp here, or hose clamp. I'm going to go ahead and separate this unit and remove it from the vehicle. So go ahead and pull that off of the throttle body. Go ahead and lift this up, twist that off, and set it aside. Disconnect this harness here. There's a little tab on the top. Push down and pull that off. Next one down, there's a green clip on this hose right here. There's two little tabs, top and bottom. You're going to pinch those in together and then push them, and it's going to unlock this unit. We'll be able to slip this off. And on the side of the throttle body, there's an electrical connector. You know, push in on this tab on the side and work that connector off. You want to push on the connector, don't grab the wires and pull on it, and separate that like so. Now this harness itself is attached. There's a little retainer here. We want to go ahead and pop this off and separate it from the intake area. I'm going to use our trim tool. Wiggle that up. I'm going to pop the hoses out here. On the back side of the intake, you're going to see a vacuum tube coming up, and there's two retainers here. You can loosen either one, move it. You want to go ahead and separate this from the intake. So I'm going to go for this one here. Slide that clamp back. Then I'm going to use a small 90-degree pick here to just go ahead and loosen up that hose and slide that off like so. Just behind the throttle body, there's another tube right here. Want to go ahead and separate that. I want to go ahead and unbolt our intake or upper intake plenum here. There are 7 bolts that secure it. There's one on the right side over here, front, right behind this harness. So it's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Let's go ahead and loosen these using an 8mm socket. These lower 6 bolts are capture bolts, which means once they're loose, you can't pull them out of the intake. However, the 7th bolt here, you can remove. We're gonna pull that out, set it aside. Now going between the throttle body and the intake, there's a bolt down inside or underneath. This goes to the intake bracket. It's a support bracket. There's an 8mm bolt underneath. We're gonna use our extension to get to that. Loosen that. You can reach underneath, grab that bolt. There you have it. Set that aside. Now at this point here, we can go ahead and lift up on this intake. Just kind of manipulate that harness off to the side there. Go ahead and work this up and off. Now once you remove that upper intake plenum, that exposes all of these intake holes here going down into the engine. You want to make sure not to drop anything down inside there. So go ahead, take precautions to cover this. You can use tape, rags, anything you got. Make sure it's clean, free of debris, and cover that. We'll go ahead and remove this valve cover here. First thing is we need to strip everything off of this. So let's go ahead and pull this vacuum tube off here. There's a plastic gray clip right here. We're going to push that in and pull up, slide that off, set that tube aside. Now across the top here, I want to go ahead and remove these ignition coils. I want to separate our harnesses here. Press down on the little tab on the back side and then slide these off. We're going to use our trim tool here to remove the harness from the valve cover. Continue to do the same around here. I want to go ahead and separate our connectors from our fuel injectors. Now there's a little red lock tab on this here, and that red lock tab needs to come up. And we'll go ahead and lift up on these little red lock tabs. I'm going to use a plastic trim tool here to go underneath, support, and pull up on this clip. I'm going to go ahead and repeat this process for the other two. Now that we have all the locks released from our injectors, I want to go ahead and pinch the little tab and wiggle these off. You're just pushing in on the little tab right underneath that red lock clip. Continue to pull off harness retainers around the valve cover. On the front edge here, we have our VVT solenoids. We have our intake solenoid on the top, exhaust solenoid on the bottom. There's a little purple retainer clip. Need to pull up on that, just like the red one on the fuel injector. And use our plastic trim tool here. Go ahead and pull up on that. Pinch the tab and pop that off. The same on the bottom. Now if these don't want to pop up, sometimes a good spray with some spray solvent will get any debris out of there. There it is. Push on that tab, pull that up. As we follow this harness up and over to the top, there's a ground strap on the front side of the engine. I want to go ahead and loosen and remove that, and that is held in by a bolt. Use an 8mm socket to go ahead and loosen and remove the ground strap bolt. Go ahead and separate this connector here and push on the little tab on the top. That is your oxygen sensor. Use your trim tool and pop that out. And go ahead and pull out our oil dipstick. Set that aside. Remove the 3 8mm bolts holding the ignition coils in place. Grab the ignition coil, gently pull upward, slightly twisting it. Now around the perimeter of your valve cover, you're going to find some of these plastic tie straps or retainers that may have broken just from age or from previous handling. You need to go ahead and remove these here. That's going to expose the nut and stud underneath. I want to go ahead and loosen the bolts around the perimeter of the valve cover. There are 11 10mm. Some of these are bolts, some of them are nuts on studs. The front one here is a nut on a stud, and then we have a few of these as bolts. what we want to do is we want to take our valve cover and we're just going to gently rock it back and forth. The seals around our sensors here, I want to make sure that those break free. Now, when pulling up on these valve covers, they can have a tendency to be stuck to the engine itself. We have the spark plug tube seals here. We have the seals around the sensors here in the front. So you can use a small pry bar. You want to be careful what you're prying up against. Now this wiring harness itself, if you follow this over across the front side, there is a ground strap further over by the AC tubing. We're going to go ahead and undo that there. Normally you can finagle the valve cover out around this here, but just going to make it easier by undoing that one little ground bolt and getting that out of the way. Now this bolt here is right in front of the passenger side strut tower here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to simply remove this bolt. I'm going to pull the wire out and I'm going to put the bolt back in. And I'll let it just kind of sit here while we continue our work. Let's pull that harness back. We can grab that valve cover. Let's work that harness out of the way, a little bit over here. And pull that up and out. Now we're on the perimeter here where the gasket was. We want to go ahead and use some spray solvent. And we're going to clean that surface. And go all the way around here. Just making sure that that surface is clean, getting rid of any debris that might be impeding on our installation of the valve cover and gasket when we reinstall. I'm just going to continue this process all the way around. Now when you're doing this here, you want to be careful not to push any garbage into the engine. Now on the front section of this engine here, there's a spot right here, and there's a spot on the other side where the front aluminum case is bolted to the cylinder head itself. You want to make sure that you can clean this here. Make sure you don't get any garbage inside the engine. But we're just going to clean this up and remove that old gasket material. I'm going to do the same thing on the bottom here. Now I'm just carefully shaving off the old residual RTV that is there. I'm not cutting into the aluminum. I'm not gouging this. You don't want to put that blade down at an angle or too steep. We want to make sure that it's almost flush with that aluminum there and clean that off. Then we'll come back with our spray solvent on the towel itself and clean up the rest of that. Do the same on the upper. I'm going to go ahead and use an 8mm socket. Loosen the bolt and we'll spin that out. Now we're removing the intake VVT solenoid. The intake one is normally white, the exhaust is the black. Exhaust is the one closest to the exhaust, intake is closest to the intake. If that helps you to identify these here. If you should remove them both at the same time and you're not sure which one goes where, well, color-coded will help you. And remove that bolt, set it aside. You can grab the solenoid and slide this out. Go ahead and take the solenoid, slide this into place. Take your bolt, go ahead and position that so you can get that bolt in there, and we'll thread that in. Go ahead and torque down your bolt to 8.3 foot-pounds. You're going to repeat the same process for your exhaust VVT solenoid. Now, if you're going to be replacing the ones on the other side of the engine as well, go ahead and pop off that back valve cover. Do the same exact process there. Now we're going to go ahead and clean up and get our valve cover installed. Now, right where these little connections are, where the front timing cover fits on there, the cam cover fits on, want to make sure that it's clean of any oils. We're going to use a little bit of black RTV, and we're going to put it right on that, right on those seams there. Now it's not a lot, it's just a little bit there, and we're going to let that set. Now we're going to let that set for about 10 minutes and let that start to semi-cure, and then we'll go ahead and put our valve cover on. Now when you're doing this job here and you have that valve cover off, it is ideal that you go ahead and replace the seals around here. You have the valve cover seal, and this here pretty much pops right out of this groove, and it comes out all the way around the entire perimeter. You also have the spark plug tube seals here. There's 3 of them here, as well as your VVT gasket seals here. For this particular job, we're going to use our current seals. When you're doing this job at home, it's highly recommended because you can present an oil leak from any one of these seals, especially if you're over 100,000 miles. The seals have a tendency to dry out. Our engine has already been serviced before, and these seals have been replaced. So we're just going to go ahead and clean up what we have. I'm just going to use a little bit of solvent on here, clean them up. Let's go ahead and lower our valve cover down in a position. Line up your spark plug tube seals here. Make sure that the wiring harness is not in the way. We can go ahead and push this down in a position. Now we're working our VVT solenoid seals down around that. Now we can confirm our 3 spark plug tube seals are seated nicely around the tubes. Our seals around our VVT are seated nicely. At this point here, go ahead and start threading in your bolts. Just get them started a few threads and go all the way around the perimeter, just getting those started. Once that bolt bottoms out, stop. Because we do have a torque sequence, we're just bottoming these out for now, and then we'll come back and torque them. With all of these bolts bottomed out, we can now start our torquing procedure. I want to start our torque sequence here. Go ahead and follow the pattern on the screen here as we do this. And this is going to be to 7.4 foot-pounds. Number 1, opposite corner, 2. Lower left, 3. Upper right, 4. Second one in. Number 6, bottom, middle. Seven. 8. 9. 10. 11. Go ahead and install your ignition coils. Just drop those down into place. Now, if you wanted to, you could go ahead and replace those spark plugs while you have the coils out. Get our bolt started here. Once we get all these started, we'll come on back and just snug those down lightly. You just want to gently snug those down. Once they bottom out, you're pretty much good. Don't over tighten them, you could damage the valve cover. With those installed, let's go ahead and start routing our wiring harness here. Install the connectors for your coils. And press those on, you can hear them clicking into place. On the left hand side, install the wiring harness for your VVT solenoids. Now once those go on, you can hear them click in. Don't forget to push the little locks down. Lock those on. Install the connector for your O2 sensor. Let's go ahead and follow our wires up here. Let's go ahead and install the 2 ground connectors. Definitely want to make sure that that ground bolt is good and snug. Go ahead and run that other ground wire up into the top. Now around the wiring harness here, we had removed a couple of the plastic retainer clips. You want to go ahead and install those. Now if any of the retainers had broken off, you can find another way to go ahead and anchor those up into position. usually using a wire tie of some sort to go ahead and anchor that up. Doing something like this here can save you a huge headache down the road instead of letting that wire harness come down and rest on that exhaust manifold, melting that harness. Now at this point here, I want to go ahead and connect our fuel injector harness. Make all these into place. Get them snapped in. And once you get them snapped in, don't forget to press the red lock tabs down into place. I'm going to grab our protective upper cover here. Slide that out of the way. Let's go ahead and take some spray solvent, and we're going to clean off the top of the lower intake plenum. Again, wipe this down, and we're ready to install the intake. Now we have our upper intake plenum right here, and here you can see in green the gasket going all the way around. Now these gaskets are normally reusable, so what you can do is just make sure that the gasket itself doesn't have any damage to it, and it's not crushed or as flat as the surface of the intake. You can just run your finger over it and feel that, and ours is still in good condition. We're just going to run a clean towel over this here. We're going to do a visual inspection. Check everything out. Ours looks really good. So at this point here, this is ready to install. Now when we go to install our upper intake plenum, you just want to be careful, make sure that all of your hoses and wiring harnesses are out of the way. We want to go ahead and tuck this in. When installing this here, be careful not to catch the gasket on the intake plenum and pull that off. Once you get it lined up, go ahead and start getting the bolts threaded in by hand. Now that we have all of our upper plenum bolts started here, you also want to go ahead and pay attention to the bracket on the back side of our intake manifold that's down on the bottom side. You want to make sure that that mounting tab is lined up. If it isn't, you want to go ahead, before you tighten this down, inspect everything and find out why the intake is not lining up with the bracket on the bottom. There could be something causing resistance. You could have put the intake down on top of the wiring harness, pinching that. Anything like that. So make sure everything lines up, as well as that mounting tab in the back. Once we're good there, we can go ahead and snug these down. Now there is going to be a torque sequence for this upper intake plenum, and it is crucial that you torque it down properly. Otherwise you can end up with an intake leak, or worse yet, a cracked intake. We're just going to gently snug down these bolts, and then we'll come back and torque them. Before we torque this, I'm going to go ahead and get the back bolt put on the bracket underneath our throttle body. We want to go ahead and torque this in a specific pattern. You go ahead and follow along on the screen here. We're going to torque this to 7.4 foot-pounds. Two, 3, 4, 5, 6. 7. Now we're not done yet. We have to do an additional 45 degrees, which is half of a quarter turn. As I'm setting my torque wrench, I'm bringing it over almost straight in front of me here, and then just bring it and that completes the torquing specs for the upper intake plenum. I'm coming along over here. Let's get our electrode connectors installed. You're gonna feel those clip into place. Install this here, push it in, and then push this green clip on. Give it a little tug, make sure that's secured in there. Install the connector on top. On the back side here, we have that vacuum hose. Work that on. I'm just gonna grab that clamp, open that up, and slide that hose the rest of the way on. Make sure that the hose is fully seated and the clamp is in the proper position there to secure that. Go ahead and put on that vacuum hose on the top of the throttle body area here. Let's install our air intake tube. You want to make sure that the air intake tube is sealed and seated on the top as well as the bottom. Same thing on the air intake box over here. Install your little vacuum tube here. Simply line that up, push it on. There it is. Just push on, make sure that you hear it clip. And then we have the vacuum hose up on the top here. Line that up, pop that on. Tighten down your hose clamps here. You just want these to be seated firmly. Snug it down, do the same for the other one here. At this point here, our air intake tube is installed. Let's go ahead and install the upper engine cover here. Going to work this down around our oil fill tube. We're going to install your plastic push pin here. We'll install the other one right over here. Go ahead and insert your oil dipstick.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.